So digital privacy is a really complex topic, and as it becomes clearer and clearer to everybody that this is something that is a growing issue and that we really need to take it seriously, we're starting to see a lot of tech companies come forward screaming and waving their hand in the air and saying, hey, I've got the solution. And normally that solution has some kind of mix of encryption or other security measures or vague kinds of claims about online safety. And it's sort of this hodgepodge of applications or things that we might be able to do to try and protect people's online privacy a little bit better. And to be honest with you, a lot of the time, this stuff is basically just BS. It's just spin to try and alleviate people's concerns, about online surveillance or data brokerage or other huge issues that are affecting pretty much everybody in the world at this point. Now, you might be wondering, okay, Alex, well, doesn't Session talk about all of these things all of the time? Why are you saying that all of this stuff is often BS? Well, tech is a part of the solution, clearly. Tech is going to play a big role in being able to protect people's privacy online in the future. And actually, funnily enough, and look, don't just switch off the video as soon as I say this, but in 2021, Mark Zuckerberg, the infamous Mark Zuckerberg, put out his vision for a privacy-focused future of social networking. And I've written down a couple of the things here that he outlined as what he saw as being really important in order to actually create that privacy-focused future. And I actually think that he hit the nail on the head here. So he talked a lot about private interactions. He talked about encryption. He talked about reducing permanence, and he talked about safety. And all of those things, when you marry them all together, are probably going to give you a pretty good picture of privacy. Now, the issue here is, well, it's Meta, right? And Facebook and all of the other parts of the Meta Corporation are not really necessarily that committed to all of these things, or at least as far as I'm concerned, they're not really. And the issue is that a lot of companies, whether they're tech companies or other companies that just happen to have some kind of technological aspect, are also not really playing ball, whether it's because their entire business model is based on not playing ball and they need to get far enough that they're convincing you that they're actually caring about privacy, but not so far that they affect their bottom line, or they just don't have the resources or don't have the capacity to actually effectively protect your privacy. So what do we do if these tech companies aren't really going to earnestly and honestly come forward and try to do the things that they're saying they are? Well, that's where regulation comes into it, right? Regulation can help us here, kind of force the issue and make those tech companies really come to the playing field. Now, the biggest crown jewel when it comes to privacy regulation is the GDPR. But there are actually over 100 countries that have some kind of legislation which protects data and privacy. Now, that seems pretty impressive, right? That seems pretty good. But obviously, as I said at the start of this video, this is still an issue that by and large is getting worse, not better. So the GDPR, as I said, is the biggest piece of privacy regulation. It's a huge deal. It only affects the EU, strictly speaking, but because of how wide-reaching that is, it ends up changing the behavior of a lot more than just tech companies based or operating in the EU. It has changed the landscape of data privacy much more broadly, and there are people who are making entire careers, entire companies, entire industries out of just knowing a lot about the GDPR, helping companies be GDPR compliant, things like that. It's a really, really big deal. But the thing with the GDPR is, even though it is a very wide-reaching and thorough piece of regulation, there are still some serious issues with it. One of the biggest ones that we can see is with the right to access. Now, the right to access is obviously something which makes a lot of sense, right? If you have information which is being stored by a company and you want to go to them and say, hey, what information are you storing about me? I want to see it. Well, it makes sense that they should have to show it to you, right? This just seems like pretty simple logic. But the issue is that by companies trying to be GDPR compliant, they're actually opening themselves up to abuse, opening themselves up to leaking people's personal information. There was a piece of research done that showed that with several companies, including ones that handled some really sensitive information like financial institutions, by basically fraudulently going and saying, okay, I am this person, even with some photoshopped identity documents, or even just as simple as making an email that matched up with that person's name, they were able to get companies to then release information under the GDPR's right to access. Quite a few of them, actually. This is obviously a really big problem. Even though those companies were trying to do the right thing, it ended up with the wrong result. And by the way, actually, those researchers, we met them when we were up at PETS in Sydney, and Key had a chance to talk with Mariano, one of the researchers who worked on the paper, and it's a really interesting one, so you should check it out if you can. But anyway, so really with this, I think, comes back to the limitation with regulation, right? Regulation can't help but see things in black and white. It can't help but miss the nuance that comes along with a very fast-moving industry like the technology industry. So you end up having this challenge of striking a balance between regulation, which is in the end really toothless, unable to be enforced, or just makes no changes really whatsoever other than in writing, or regulation which is extremely overbearing, either stifles innovation or just has the completely wrong outcome by lack of understanding. So basically what I'm trying to get at here is that regulation on its own can't solve this issue. It needs to be something which is married together with technology, with cultural changes, business changes, which then, when brought together, can actually make these really high-level systemic changes that are required to actually change the way that we treat privacy online. Because as we've seen with the GDPR, although it may be well-meaning, there are a lot of companies that just simply aren't GDPR compliant, even after years of it being in place, or even the ones that aren't necessarily actually improving the privacy in every circumstance, at least, of the people's data that they are handling. So what I would really want to see in the future is obviously regulation which leaves more room for nuance. It leaves more room for the world to change around it. Because quite simply that is exactly what's going to happen. When you look at something like Session and its approach to data privacy and the way it handles data, it doesn't necessarily even make sense in the context of something like the GDPR, right? Like, because of things like decentralized storage, decentralized handling of data, or just flat out not collecting data whatsoever, it doesn't necessarily fit neatly into the box of something like the GDPR, even though obviously Session as a piece of technology is extremely privacy preserving and privacy enhancing even. So what we need to see is hopefully in the future regulators, tech builders, business leaders, and cultural leaders being able to come together and work collaboratively, and with that common goal in mind of actually making real positive impact on people's right to privacy in order to have the outcome that we're looking for here. Because otherwise we're going to end up with a lot of half measures, we're going to end up with problems getting worse before they get better, and obviously that's not what anyone wants to see, because these things, although they are sometimes, in a lot of cases, technological issues, have real world impacts and real world effects that change people's lives in negative ways. So it's really important that we address them as quickly and effectively as we can, which I think is going to be by addressing it together. So that's pretty much everything for today, but I'll see you next time.